Hey people, I decided to do a video today since I haven't done one in quite a while. And today this might be, well, I always think of these as a really important part of your firing, even though it's not a pot, especially if you use runny glazes. These are biscuits, and I'm just going over how I make them. So I start out with, in Japan we have something called dosembo, which is a real sort of, it's a fire clay, and I think it is, I'm not sure what the rough in it, it's not grog, but it's like silica sand, and you can buy it with fine sand or rough sand. And I like to buy it with the rough sand and then sift the sand out usually. Today, if you sift the sand out ahead of time, you still get a good strong biscuit that's refractory and keeps things from sticking to the shelf. But they're much easier to make because the wire goes through the clay real easily. I don't know if you can see how really rough that is. And the stuff itself is very plastic. Here I've got some that I prepared, and this is what it looks like. And it's very plastic. It reminds me of ball clay with a bunch of heavy stuff, heavy sand mixed in. I think it's pure silica sand. What I do usually is I sift the sand out, because I buy it in dry bags. I sift the sand out and I use that separately. I just keep it in a bucket, and I sift that out onto shelves when I need to be able to lay something down and be able to expand and contract on a shelf. And then the sand also does a pretty good job. If there's a drip or two of glaze that comes down, the sand kind of absorbs it and keeps it from getting to the shelf too much. Anyway, this is what it looks like when it's mixed up and ready to go. Very plastic. I don't know if you can hear it. You can hear all that gravel in there rubbing together. Anyway, it's real plastic. You can do a lot with it and it doesn't fall apart. See, it's much more flexible than most of the clay I use for making pots. Anyway, I decided to do things a little differently today. I usually sift the sand out. This batch I didn't sift the sand out, and so I did tried to cut it into 5mm thick slabs. And I just used a very thin sort of piano wire, sort of typical wire tool. Very thin wire. It's thinner than the Kemper wires, but anyway, you can see I started out with a perfectly round cylinder that I was cutting pieces from, and I didn't get anywhere near round because the sand in this stuff really prevented the wire from moving around very well, and it tore out chunks, and I ended up with a bunch of ovals instead of a bunch of circles. Well, aside from the aesthetic aspect of it, it's perfectly fine. They'll work just as well, and so I'm not too worried about that. I usually make them in 3 sizes. This is the medium size. I usually make them in about a small, what would I say, maybe 3 inches across circle, which I don't know, that's about 8 centimeters, I guess, something like that. And then the next size up is this size, which is about, 5 inches, 4.5, 5 inches round, ideally. And when the sand is sifted out, you end up with more of the plastic stuff and not as much aggregate, and so they tend to warp when they dry. And so I go through a couple times. This is the first time after I've cut them. I've laid them out on the slab, I've laid them out on a board, on a paper towel. These are those shop towels that you can get at Costco. These are great for pottery. They just last forever. They don't fall apart. You can wash them and dry them. And these, I've had these for, gosh, 5 or 6 years now. But I paddle them out once, then I lay them out to dry, and then at some point I'll go and check on them, and I'll turn them over, give them a light paddle again, and let them continue drying. And usually that does it, and it prevents them from warping too badly when they dry. I'm probably not going to do that today. I'm probably just going to do the single paddling this time around, because they're so full of this aggregate. I'm pretty confident that they're not going to do anything drastic when they dry. So it has its advantages and its drawbacks, I think. Anyway, these are just indispensable. And when I had first started pottery, I had gone to my mentor's house, and he was unloading his kiln. And the first time I saw these, he had one underneath every single pot. And I said, "What are those for?" And he said, "Well, they, when you fire on shells, or or you're using runny glazes and things like that, then the glazes are going to run, or the shells are going to melt. You can conceivably end up with a lot of problems, and you end up grinding your shelves and your shelf life. And shelves are expensive, right? Kiln shelves. So it makes sense to keep as good care of them as you can. Take as good care of them as you can. And if you use these in your firings, there's so many advantages. You don't have to worry about your pots sticking to the shelf. You don't ever have to grind your shelves. You can buy your shelves, they come, you use them in your kiln, and you never have to do anything to them, aside from maybe turn them over occasionally because they start warping in one direction. But if you use these, you will eliminate the need for shelf grinding. Caveat, if you're using a wood kiln, you may still have to grind shelves every once in a while if you're getting a lot of ash buildup. And I fire for glazes, though. I don't tend to even get much crud on my shelves, even in the wood kiln. Yeah, these are kind of a pain in the butt to do. I mean, you've got to take the time. If you take a half day, you can make enough for several. You can make enough. I could probably, if I spent half a day making